life. Welcome back to another Comp and Coffee. It is an exciting, brand new year. I'm here as I often am with Matt and Bill. Matt, how excited are you for the new year? What are some of your resolutions? What are you going to be doing this year?
I don't have any good resolutions. I try and be a better person. There you go. How about that?
Oh, a better person. That's good. Just everything.
Just all around.
Aspects of your life will become better.
All facets of life. I'm just going to try and be better.
Excellent. Bill, how about yourself? What are your New Year's resolutions?
Well, thanks for asking Matt first. Give me time to think about it. I think my resolution is more comp, more coffee, and more comp and coffee.
Oh, look at that. See,
Nice.
and that's what it's all about. As the official compensation ombudsman, Bill, I think that was a good answer. You're upholding your team well.
Thank you very much.
So, as we think about new things to do in the new year and what we want to get better at, one of the things in talking to clients I'm hearing a lot about, as the new year comes, we just did a year in review webinar back in early December for all of our clients. And, a lot of our clients are reaching out to us and saying, hey, we're thinking about new ways to think about compensation. Can we spend a little time with you talking about that and how that might align to the things you guys are building? Of course, we love having conversations like that. We learn so much from our clients and it makes our products better. But one of the things that's starting to come up, I'm hearing it more and more, is we are looking more and more at skills in our organization. We're looking at using skills to understand the cost of employment, but we're also looking at skills to understand where people might leave and move into adjacent industries, even though the job titles are different. Or we're looking at skills to figure out, how do we career path our employees, or we're trying to figure out what we want to stand up a new business unit, what skills are required, and is it cheaper to, buy those skills or build those skills? And so skills is sort of like top of mind for a lot of folks. And we thought it might be kind of fun to talk a little bit today about skills and specifically like what exactly is skills-based pay? Bill, being the ombudsman, have you heard about skills-based pay in the past? Is this sort of the new flash in the pan thing, or has it been around a little while
now? I could go on forever in answering that question. And so certainly, yes, and skills has always been part of pay, but skills-based pay is a little different where it's, more focused on, I guess the easy way of saying it is thinking about the employees as not as everybody matching to a fixed job description, but it's the sum of the skills that you have or the sum of the skills that we need to get a job done. And so if you think about it, everyone's doing it to some degree, taking into account skills. Like when you look at an employee and say, oh, the median for this job is, $70K, but, he has such and such a skill or, adds more value to the team because they can do this thing that's not necessarily part of the job, but is of value to our group, to our company. And so we adjust pay based on skills. But, talking to clients, hearing about this more and more in that they're looking at, more at the sum of the skills than at the fixed job description, and looking at determining pay based on skills rather than based on the job description, or rather than just based on the job description, depending on who they are. And I think because of the way the economy works and because of, millennials, Gen Z, and people, kind of creating their own hybrid jobs and, jobs changing so rapidly, I think it's becoming more critical to HR to acknowledge that like standardized jobs are going to be less the norm going forward.
Yeah, I think that's right. Matt, are you hearing from clients that are clients talking about sometimes they're losing employees to other industries in adjacent industries where they need the same skills, but maybe the job title is completely different, so you wouldn't even think about that as a competitive job? Are you hearing some of those stories?
Yeah, I feel like I'm starting to hear some of those stories. I think that, you raised a good point, like right at the end there where you're talking about it's not a job title that you would think of. And so you're not necessarily competing for talent with other organizations in your area for this job title. But when you narrow in on one of these skills, people are going to come in and poach your people for those particular skills in the recruiting market. So I'm starting to hear that a little bit more. I think it's an important topic to bring up. I think that we're hearing about it more. But like specifically, I'm wondering if you all, from like a market pricing standpoint, are people primarily, guys, I just lost my train of thought completely. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Oh my God.
Now that's
I don't even know where I was. Yeah,
That's it. That's a missing skill. So Matt's train of thought skill seems to have abandoned him. Well, it'll come back to you, Matt. So put a pin in that and jump back in when you remember. But yeah, so exactly. And as Bill was saying, right, it's really the idea that the first time I saw anything related to skill-based pay was in a SHRM document that actually came out way back in 2011, which it's funny how time works, because I think 2011 is not that long ago. But then when you realize that it's 2022, it's actually more than a decade ago. So that's a little disconcerting. But in any case, so over 10 years ago, there was SHRM published a paper by the gentleman, Herbert Henman, who said, he had a whole paper about skills-based pay and the concept of it. And his sort of thesis was that skills-based pay, or SBP as he called it, is a compensation system that rewards employees with additional pay in exchange for formal certification of the employee's mastery of three things: skills, knowledge, and or competencies. Did that trigger any brain cells, Matt? Did that remind you what you wanted to talk about at all? Just jump in there. No.
Well, that's. I'll say that, like, that's sort of what I was hitting on a few minutes ago, where you're looking at a job description and adjusting for skills, which is a standard thing that comp professionals do. But you kind of buried a thing in there. It's like certification of those, which is getting at provable or demonstrable skills, not just saying I'm good at Python, that I have a certification in it. And then, for the World at Work fans out there, it's, skills, knowledges, or competencies is sounding a lot like KSABs, knowledge, skills, abilities, and behaviors, or what we'll sometimes call compensable factors. It's all things that are, add-ons to the job. It's, kind of like guacamole. It's like, that'll cost you if you bring in somebody with that extra skill.
Matt, can you make a note in our marketing material? Our marketing material, skills-based pay is like guacamole. Just make a note on that.
That sounds like the title of a blog.
That's a blog post right there, Bill. That's clickbait. Skills-based pay.
I'm guessing that's going to become the name of this podcast.
That is. That's the title. Skills-based pay. It's like guacamole. I'm actually writing that down right now. It's like guacamole. Okay.
It's the guacamole on the taco bowl that is their job description.
I'm glad we're starting 22 off so professionally, and it's great.
Right, but it is that. I mean, that is how skills have worked, and that's how most people listening to us, think of skills and compensation. And it's a fairly, I don't want to say simple or simplified approach, but it's it's a fairly narrow approach to adjusting somebody's pay for skills. Versus, doing all of the market pricing, all of the pay decisions based on skills. And I think it is, it has been around for a while, but it's I think taking on more prominence and more significance. So more people are talking about it, and it's becoming a bigger component of the pay decision, or at least people are talking about it more. And it's funny, it's a lot in bigger companies where they're, investigating that. You made the reference to, buy versus build, or, bring in the skills, or, train people to add skills. And that is sort of a big company decision.
And you mentioned
not something small companies want to do a lot of.
Yeah, and there's a couple ideas in there too you mentioned, and one of them was that the idea that why is it important now, right? And I think a couple things are happening. One, and we're seeing this in our data, right? So So even as recently as like 2 years ago or so, we'd look at data and we'd say, wow, if you real times data showing that a data science 2 job title is gaining, has gained 14% in the last 4 months, whereas traditional, aging forward with the traditional survey data, you'd have guessed it had gone up 1.3%. So you're like, wow, just having timely data is important. But now what we're finding is that it's actually the reason things are jumping so much. It's actually specific skills that are driving these jobs. So when we started diving into our skill data, we started seeing that actually, if you put an AI skill in there, now you're looking at like an 18% jump in that time period. So it's really almost less about the job titles and really more about, as demand shifts, what skills are becoming more in demand. And it's almost ancillary that it happens to hit that job, because it's really that particular skill now is critical. And as I think just in a post-COVID world, we're really looking at very specific skills that would help. The other thing I wonder about is there some help here for pay transparency as companies start to think about getting to a more transparent pay model where you're actually able to see other folks' actual comp, right? It means that for there to be differences between people, there has to be observable differences. And we'll get back to how you can observe whether or not someone's got a skill, but let's for a minute pretend you could. Understanding who had what skills would allow you to better understand why person A might get paid slightly more or less than person B. Does that resonate? If we could have that sort of visibility, would it help us down the road for things like pay transparency? In other words, skills-based pay is more person-based and less just, we just assume everybody in this job has these skills, because when you get down to who owns has what skills, it's really a person-related thing, not just a job title-related thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that helps. I mean, in conversations about pay with employees, if you're a manager in coaching, career development, that sort of stuff, this all plays into there. It's like, if you want to get to this level of making this amount of money, you need to sharpen this skill, develop this skill, get this certification in order to get to that point that, Johnny or Susie on your team is there making more money than you are today. Well, they've already, they already have these skills and they're high performing there. And you can get to that, but you just need to get to that level, and then you will get the increases that they need. So from an individual, in a role, wanting to make more money, wanting to broaden their career, it's helpful in knowing these skills and what next steps they need to take. And then as a manager, it helps for these pay transparency conversations too.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Absolutely. And I think it also helps in pay transparency's cousin, pay equity. Mm-hmm. Because one of the problems with job descriptions is job descriptions are sort of by design generic, because you want to be able to categorize your employees into cohorts of people that do pretty much the same thing. But if people do pretty much the same thing, but except for one key skill that's different, but that skill is valuable, you have this issue if those people are different genders or different races, and say, oh no, now we have disparity. But they're not doing the same job, but they have the same job title, and they're at the same level in the same reporting structure. And and so what you're sort of doing is saying, yes, they have the same nominal title, but they are not doing the same job. And it's a different version of what Matt was just saying, is that the skill actually differentiates the role or the function and the value that person brings to the company. And I think, I'm going to spin backwards a bit here. It's like a lot of the job description issue goes back to, one of my favorite, talking points is that this is all based on how did we collect data, in 1950. It's like you couldn't do skills-based pay without, advanced technology, and so people are saying, well, we can now, we can collect skills for each person in the organization. And, and so now we can look at ways of assessing the value of those skills, or the value of those skills add to the standard job. And so you can think of, a job as, think of it more in the terms of like a job family with like an additional pool of skills, and that collection of skills plus the job family defines what you do, what your role is.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think and it gives you some sort of a framework to hang all these things on and differentiate with people more, but then also, as Matt said, help people understand where they can go and how they can earn more by learning more, right, or refining their abilities. Let's talk a little bit. You mentioned this earlier, Bill, or maybe you did, Matt. This idea of skills, competencies, and knowledge. And that was covered actually in Henneman's document. Also, there was another recent article by Aon talking about why more companies are turning to skills-based pay. And they also mentioned the same matrix. So I'm thinking that Henneman's onto something here. And as well, he gave definitions for the differences between skills, competencies, and knowledge. And when I read these, it reminded me very much of my days in HR software for healthcare, because healthcare defines these things very similarly, in that a lot of healthcare workers, particularly nurses and doctors too, have to be certified, and they have skills. And in healthcare and in Henneman's documents, skills are defined as acquired and observable expertise. So, for example, in healthcare, a phlebotomist, if you have the phlebotomy skill, well, I can watch you draw blood and see if you do it well or not, right? It's an observable truth. I can say, oh, yep, Susie can definitely draw blood. She's a good phlebotomist, right? And then you have competencies, right? So skills are observable. Competencies are like, oh, and by the way, the other thing about skills that's sort of interesting is they generally have specific usages, right? Whereas competencies are like broad traits needed to perform a variety of skills. So again, back to my healthcare example, bedside manner is a competency, right? A little harder to measure and harder to observe. You know it when you see it, but being good at bedside manner makes a lot of your skills easier, to pull off. Like it's easier to draw blood if you can calm the patient down first and make them feel comfortable and safe, for example. So competencies are more general, broader traits. And then knowledge is acquired information that's used in performing these various tasks, competency, skills, and other things. Does that ring true to you guys? Does that match sort of your thinking when you think about these three broad categories, skills, competencies, and knowledge?
Yeah, and the thing that I like about using each one of these in lieu of like a job summary or even on top of that is like, I think, the three of us, we've seen a lot of job descriptions in our past as hiring managers and working in compensation and market pricing positions. And very often job descriptions are, I don't even know how to describe it, somewhat bland, not descriptive, and generally crappy, and it doesn't tell enough about what's required of the person you're looking to hire into that position or the person you're evaluating on your team. These give you key things to look for and assess, and it just gives it more of a prescription of what you should have for a job description, and it's these key skills, competencies, and knowledge right there. Yep.
That is right. I mean, I agree. And I also think it's important to think of them as different things. I like the way, you describe them. And I think we use these words, skills, competencies, and knowledge a lot without, thinking about what they mean. And I think, if we're all being honest, we're all a little fuzzy on what we mean when we say them or what we think when other people say them. Competencies in particular is one that, as you were saying it, I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. Although I think people often think of it as being skills. They're,
right.
They're the same thing and they're not, so, he's organized, she's personal. But anyway, back to you, Russ.
No, that's right. And one thing about that too is since competencies are harder to describe, they're also harder to teach, right? Competencies are some of those things. By the way, you can learn a competency, but they're more, they are sort of personality traits, and they're harder to instruct than a demonstrable task like a skill. Like again, phlebotomy, I can walk you through the mechanics, or fixing a car muffler, right? I can walk you through the mechanics of that. But making a person who just was traumatized feel at ease, that's a harder thing to teach, right? And so there's a little bit of difference there too. Now, one other thing that Henneman did, which I thought was interesting, was he created a matrix out of this, right? So he said, well, you got skills, competencies, and knowledge, sort of on one side of the matrix, and then you've got depth, breadth, and self-management on the other. So in other words, for each of these skills, competencies, and knowledge, you can define or for the person, you can define a depth, a breadth, and an ability to self-manage. So depth means, according to him, you're increasing expertise in existing skills. So you're just getting really, really good at what you already know. Breadth means you're broadening the skills you can, demonstrate. And then self-management means you're doing things like self-directed work, training, budgeting. You're doing things beyond just those simple skills and competencies. You're actually getting more into like a leadership sort of type roles, or at least being able to be self-directed. Do those resonate? Do you think adding those levels are helpful as you start thinking about how you would sort of, rate people by skills, competencies, and knowledge?
Yes. I mean, it's sort of, I think all of these things are on a spectrum or a continuum, and that, you can improve your skills. You can think of it as you can broaden them or deepen them. Get better at being a phlebotomist, but you can also get better at, diagnosing blood diseases. That would be, broadening or adding to the skills. And I think it is important. None of these things are binary. It's not you have it or you don't. And I think it's important to measure those things, and that again will come into pay. Somebody who is, there are levels of expertise, and someone with more expertise is likely to warrant a higher salary.
Yeah, you mentioned, Russ, I think you mentioned Python earlier. You could have Python as a skill as a developer, but you could be not so great at it. So it doesn't mean that because you have that skill, you should be getting paid more. If you are, an expert in Python, then yes, that would necessitate an increase in pay, or maybe a larger increase in pay over someone who has satisfactory skills, or however you want to manage that depth.
Yep. And I like depth and breadth also and self-management, because it also kind of ties to something I've wrestled with as a leader over the years. I don't know if you guys have run into this, where especially in software development, I'm sure this also happens in healthcare and other specialized skill sets too, where you have like an engineer or a product manager, and this is a person that's just really wants to master their craft, right? They want to get really, really good at a specific small set of skills, and they don't have any desire to manage others. They don't have any desire to become a broad expert. They just want to really become a master of your craft. And you need those people, right? And you want them to stay in your organization. Yeah. And so you want to reward them with increased pay. But then others might want to have a more breadth of skills, be a little broader, have a more broader understanding, and or be a manager and have that management skill set. And so I think this kind of hints that there's different kinds of people, and there should be reward structures for those different kinds of people. Does that make sense, Bill?
It does. And actually, I'm going to do a warning. I'm going to do a bad job of tying these things together. But, the breadth and depth of your expertise skills is also it's linked to your management skills and competencies, because you could, good managers can manage a team of people that do something the manager, him or herself, can't do. You just need to understand the basics of what's going on, to tie to Matt's, thing. An engineering manager can manage someone whose primary job is, linked to Python skills without actually being better than that person at Python.
That's right.
You have to understand what Python does, how it works, what the projects or what the goals of that person are. But your management skill plus your understanding of what Python is about gives you the ability to manage that person, that team. And I think it all ties together. It's all integrated, and you don't have to be an expert to be a manager.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, go ahead, Matt.
Can I go off on a sidebar right here? Permission?
Yeah, go, Matt, go.
All right. The other thing that I was thinking about while Bill was talking about that, it made me think of when I'm managing a team, I may not know all of the right skills that my team needs to have in order to be a high performing team. I may think that I have it all covered, but there's certainly things that I could be missing, and skills, competencies, all that sort of stuff. And if you start to take this approach of looking at skills-based pay and looking at competencies and all that sort of stuff, as a manager, as a hiring manager, you will start to pick up other things that you should be looking out for that maybe you weren't in the first place. And I think that, it's a benefit to this whole process that's maybe not thought of as one of the first things that you're looking for, but it helps you keep an eye out for more stuff that you should be looking for that maybe just in your experience you haven't needed in the past, whatever role you were in. Does that make sense?
It does. It actually highlights, both your comments highlights one of my favorite misquoted quotes. So depth and breadth kind of hint at, the famous quote, "A jack of all trades is a master of none." Do you know why that's a misquote, Bill?
I thought that quote was actually "jack of all trades, but master of none."
Yes. It's jack of all trades is a master of none, but it sounds like it is not a compliment, but it actually is, because the full quote is, "A jack of all trades is a master of none, but oft times better than a master of one." So the idea is that some people, master of craft is very important, but also it's important to have a breadth of a little bit of knowledge that you can do things like Matt's describing, like actually manage people who are experts and other things. So I think I like these metrics because they are these sort of ways to think about stuff, because they kind of get you thinking about these different aspects of your people. Well, this guy is not as good a Python developer, but he actually has really good self-management. He knows a little bit of everything. I could see her or him getting into more of a leadership role, or this other person, they're really, really good at Python. I could see them really getting into the deeper dives on some of the more complex project kind of stuff.
And then once you finish out that quote, it sounds more like a Dr. Seuss quote.
It does. It's a little rhymey. It's less cool, I think.
There's nothing wrong with a little rhyme.
That's right.
Although I think, I guess we've been going for a little bit here, so it's time to interject a idea for a future podcast. Not everybody wants to continue moving up in an organization and, move up, from, low level to mid level to high level doer and then to manager. Like, some people like to do things, and you see it all the time. Like, some software developers, that's what they love to do. And, I'm now going to come up with a new quote that I'm going to misquote. It's sort of, promoting to the level of incompetency. It's like, we as HR people and as business managers love to assume everybody wants to be promoted to the next level. Mm-hmm. And you push people up to the point where they're no longer happy at what they're doing and no longer good at it. And so it's important to keep in mind that people who have like deep and broad expertise at a specific thing, they want to keep doing that specific thing, keep getting better at it, or, add, new kinds of software engineering skills to what they're doing, or accounting skills or legal skills. It doesn't, it's not specific to software engineering here. And then others, or get a little burned out at, writing code every day, or reviewing contracts every day. And they want to get to the level of managing people that do that. And they have the skills and competencies to make that work. And so we got to keep that in mind.
I think that's a great segue to sort of the end here, Bill, but that might be a future episode too, where we talk in more detail about this. One of the things that the Aon article sort of covered near the end of itself as well is that there's sort of two traditional approaches to skill-based pay, or approaches that people are thinking about. There's the more traditional skill-based pay approach. And I think I hinted at this earlier, where all your employees are still in bands based on their job title. And then just what skills they own moves them up and down in their band. So maybe if you have a few extra skills, you move from the 65th percentile to the 70th percentile, but you're still in that band of like, software developer 3. You'll never be able to get to the band of, senior director of software development at that pay scale, because you're still down at the at the lower one. The more progressive, though, so Aon pointed out that there's a more progressive approach to skills-based pay that a lot of folks are looking at, where the bands themselves are dictated by skill categories, and then your expertise, your depth in that skill, or your breadth of skills defines where you fall in that band. So in other words, to your point, if you did it that way, and there's a specific skill like artificial intelligence development, for example, that's really, really critical, and someone becomes a master of craft in that, but never wants to, advance in terms of managing people, but just wants to really master that craft. Well, if that skill is super valuable according to the market, they will simply move to the top of that band, and that band's its own band, and it could be as much maybe as a senior director in the right organization, especially if the market says that's a very, very valuable skill in high demand.
It can and may have to be more.
Right.
And that's the thing, like, I think that people need to get in their mind is like, hierarchies will also get all kinds of funky here when, you start actually evaluating skills. And if you think about it, you want that to happen, because if that person you just talked about, if she is a superstar with that skill and does not want to be a manager, and that role, that function is critical to your business, you're going to pay a lot of money for that person. And it doesn't matter that, that she's making more money than her manager, and it's possible. And, you see this a fair amount, could make more money even than the CEO. And that happens a lot in financial services companies. If there's anybody, left old enough to remember the infamous Katie Couric rule, where they were talking about disclosing pay of the highest paid people, regardless of their level in the organization. And I think it was NBC didn't want to do that because they didn't want their competitors to know how much they were paying their critical talent, and it was like a competitive thing. And the idea was that, Katie Couric, I don't know why it became about her, but was getting paid, so much more than the people that were in the top 5 executives in the proxy disclosure. And so, and that's because she had a skill, and the skill was attracting a lot of people to watch.
Yeah, there were very few people that they could bring in to replace her, but their top 5 people, their executives, there are other people out there that they could bring in, and the network is still going to run probably just about the same. But you pull Katie Couric off the Today Show, and things could really go downhill.
Exactly. And, and that's sort of the, boiled down, that's, why skill-based pay is at least a critical mindset and, valuable to think about, regardless of how you do it.
Well, since we got to Katie Couric, it means it must be time to say goodbye. So I'm glad we got that far.
I don't know what that means.
I don't know either.
We like Katie Couric.
But Matt, before we say goodbye, I just wanted to give you an opportunity. Did you ever remember what you lost your train of thought on at the top of the show?
No, it was something around market pricing, and we actually ended up a little closer to it, I think, with the traditional approach versus the progressive approach. And I was thinking about just straight skills-based market pricing, or a hybrid of taking a look at starting with a job description and then sprinkling in skills from there. I don't know what path I was going down, but that was the topic. And I think that's the first time this happened to me in all the episodes that we've done. So I got one. That's my one.
No, you can. It's okay. I think I'm glad it got in there somehow, and I'm sure it was a great idea. So I can't wait for it to come back. I think in 3 episodes, Matt's going to go, you know what it was? I remember. So
my mom
so much.
My mom used to say to me that, like, whenever I forget something like that, it was probably a lie. So I don't know if that's true here, but maybe it was.
For the integrity of the podcast, let's say it's not. But I would also say, now that we've talked about it for this long, it means we can't cut it out in editing either.
Oh, no, it's going to stay in there. We're not removing that. That's gold right there. That and Katie Couric. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And how are you guys thinking about skills-based pay? Is it on your radar? What are you looking at? Is it something you're thinking about for the future? How can we help you? Let us know. either email us at coffee@payscale.com or reach out to us on Twitter at Payscale. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on Comp and Coffee.
Comp and Coffee is a PayFactors production dedicated to the compensation community. We welcome your feedback. Send email to coffee@payfactors.com, tweet us at PayFactors, or share your thoughts in our PayFactors community tile. Until next time, keep your coffee hot and your data fresh.